Welcome to the UFO Reality, where we attempt to uncover the hidden truth of the UFO phenomenon. Today, I'd like to talk to you about something that is really probably the most fascinating of all of the UFO stories that I've ever come across. It goes right back to the very heart of the entire subject. If this is true, the world is not what we think it is. I'm talking, of course, about Robert Scott Lazar. Bob Lazar, born 26th of January in 1959 in Florida. He had a childhood, attended his local school, high school, and local college, and later moved to Las Vegas, Nevada. In 1982, we find Bob Lazar being interviewed by a local journalist, and he appears on the front page of the local Nevada newspaper, where he is seen as the man with the jet car, and the journalist produces a story in which he describes Bob Lazar as being a physicist at Los Alamos. Bob Lazar claims to have worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory as a physicist. He claims to have a master's degree in electrical engineering and also in physics. The degrees he claims come from MIT and Caltech, obviously two of the most prestigious institutions probably in the whole world. Bob later leaves Los Alamos National Laboratory, and as his story goes, he becomes a photo processor, and he sets up a small business working for himself, and for the next few years he's gainfully employed taking and producing photographs for real estate publications and to help with the sale of real estate in the local area. Now, Bob, according to his story, decides he wants to return to the world of physics and academia, and begins to submit his CV to various institutions and various national laboratories across the country. Now, Bob is invited to an interview at what is EG&G in Las Vegas, and the interview Bob receives, he seems to pass the first interview, and he's later invited back for a second interview. And during the second interview, the interviewer seems very, very much more interested in what Bob does out of work. What is he interested in? What kind of person he is? What are his personal interests? And Bob later describes this as being more about the kind of person he is, the kind of mind that he has. Is he curious? Does he think outside of the box? Well, Bob is contacted and is told that he has a position, and he's telephoned and he's asked to go to the EG&G offices, which were at the time based at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas, where he'll be transported to a facility. Now, I should say at this point that part of the background to Bob getting this position, or allegedly getting this position, is that in 1982, Bob claimed to have attended a lecture given by the great physicist Dr. Edward Teller, who is known as the father of the hydrogen bomb. And Bob turned up to the lecture. He arrived early. He didn't want to be late. He wanted to have a good seat. He arrived. The facility was still locked, and sitting outside was Edward Teller. And Edward Teller was reading the Las Vegas newspaper, and the newspaper happened to have on its front page a picture of Bob Lazar as the man with the rocket car. Bob takes this chance to use Mr. Teller's reading of the newspaper as a means to strike up a conversation. He introduces himself and mentions that he's the guy on the front of the newspaper, and obviously he attends the lecture, and later uses this chance meeting as a means to use the name of Edward Teller and to suggest that Edward Teller possibly put in a word for him or referred him. He doesn't know that, but he did contact or attempt to contact Dr. Teller and say that he was the rocket car guy that he'd met outside the lecture hall just before the lecture that he gave, and if you remembered him, he was now looking for employment, and here were his credentials, and he proposes this as a possible reason as to why he might have had the interview granted. He doesn't know this for certain, but he suggests this may be a possibility. So Bob's flown from the EG&G facility at McCarran, north of Las Vegas. It's only a short flight, around about 100 miles. So it's maybe 20 minutes on the now famous or infamous Janet flights, the white 737s or 727s, as they probably were at the time, with the red line across or along the length of the body of the plane. Upon landing, Bob's met. He's taken in a blacked out, as he describes, school bus, converted with blacked out windows, and accompanying him is a man that we come to know as Dennis. And Dennis is Bob's, as he described it, his contact, his handler. He's always a constant presence with Bob, and he describes feeling slightly uneasy as Dennis would simply sit and stare. Anyway, he arrives at the facility at 14 miles south of the landing strip, and he is taken through a rather inconspicuous looking door into the side of a mountain or cliff face, literally carved into the side of the mountain. And beyond the door there's a simple reception area. He's shown to one side. He's sat in a plain room, and he's told that there are a stack of files that he should go through that will brief him and bring him up to speed on what it is that he's going to be required to work on. He spends the day going through these files, and quite frankly, Bob feels unsure as to whether this is some kind of trick, some kind of psychological test, because the folders contain information about off-world species. There are diagrams showing dissections and internal organs and various craft. And at this point, Bob's thinking, well, is this a trick just to see what kind of personality I have? He has no knowledge as to what it is that he's going to be working on at this point, and treats this perhaps just some kind of psychological test. Anyway, he's later again flown back out to the facility. This time he's taken by Dennis down as he describes it, a vast, almost never-ending corridor which seems to head into the horizon, almost a vanishing point. You can't see or make out the end of the corridor. He's shown into a laboratory where he meets his soon-to-be co-worker by the name of Barry. And Barry is very excited to see Bob. He's obviously been working alone. He's very, very excited to have company, and he begins to describe to Bob what it is that they'll be working on. He has a gravity amplifier. He has a reactor, which he shows to Bob and describes it as this basketball-sized hemisphere on a plate, beneath which is a small chamber that contains a conically shaped and layered amount of what he is told is element 115, and it is cut and shaped and worked and laid in such a way. Bob doesn't know why this is done, but it's necessary for the working of the reactor. When the casing is placed back over the top of the reactor, Barry invites Bob to try and put his hands onto the hemispherical casing, and he feels a resistance pushing back. He describes it as two opposing magnets. You can push them together, but the resistance builds to the point where you can't go any further, and then it repels. It's pushing, and you can go so far but no further. Barry asks Bob to throw a golf ball at it, which he does, and immediately it's repelled and bounces and destroys or knocks a ceiling tile out, which they have to hastily replace. So Bob at this point realizes that he's working on some technology that is perhaps not of this world. This is November 1988. Now, during Bob's working time at the facility, he is taken to actually view the craft from which the gravity drive is taken from, and he's taken down into a hangar, and in the hangar he sees a craft, and he describes it, or has described it, as the sports model. It's sleek, it's about 16 feet high, it's approximately 52 feet in diameter, and has 3 floors within its hull. Bob's actually allowed into the craft. He surmises that this is because perhaps seeing where the gravity emitter was taken from, it may help in his thinking and his working of the problem as to how to reverse engineer and how to come up with the way to replicate this technology. Bob sees the middle floor. He describes 3 chairs. He is allowed to look into the lower floor where the amplifiers and emitters are fitted, and he has no knowledge of what's on the upper floor. He's not allowed to see that. Bob describes everything as being very compartmentalized. You work specifically on your topic, you don't discuss it, you don't overlap, you don't see anything that's not part of your specific portfolio, your project. So what happens? Bob describes working for the next few months, and he becomes uneasy. He mentions what he's working on to his best friend at the time, a gentleman by the name of Gene Huff, and he reports being followed. There are cars outside of his house. Okay, this may be just security that's required for working on a project such as this, but it makes Bob very uneasy. So he feels he needs to tell somebody what it is that he's doing. Well, it goes a little bit further than that, because Bob actually gets to see the craft fly. On one occasion he's taken out and he's taken into the desert at the side of the hangar, and the craft he describes as being already airborne when he sees it, and it's in the air and it's performing maneuvers. He describes it as wobbling, and he's invited to stand underneath it, and there is no noise, there is no downdraft, there is no engine noise, there is no visible way or signs of how the craft is being propelled, or what it is that is causing or allowing the craft to fly and maneuver. The craft performs some low speed maneuvers, and that's it as far as Bob's concerned. But he does learn of the testing schedule, and that is the craft is tested on Wednesday evenings, and apparently this is the quietest night. There's less traffic, there's less chance of being seen. So Bob decides to take his friend Gene Huff and John Lear and I believe his wife, and they drive out into the desert to a perimeter fence, which is about, at the time, about 8 miles from the facility, and they camp out and they await the test. And sure enough, there is a craft lift off. It performs maneuvers, it glows in the sky, and Bob's friends video this, and 3 times they go out. At least Bob thinks it was 3 times. On the final time, they are apprehended by security, and at this point Bob decides that he's perhaps overstepped the mark. He's no longer contacted and no longer requested to go back to S4, and he becomes increasingly afraid for his own safety. He's being followed. So in discussions with his friends, particularly John Lear, he suggests that perhaps the best way to protect himself is to document what he's seen, is to effectively go public. Now, John Lear is a friend or has a contact at the local news TV station, a gentleman by the name of George Knapp. And George Knapp produces a segment that is broadcast on the local news. Bob insists on anonymity. He's filmed in silhouette and uses the name of Dennis, which was the name of his supervisor. And in it he tells of working at a secret facility in the desert called S4, part of the Area 51, and that his task was to reverse engineer alien, off-world, non-human technology, and that he was working on the power generation and propulsion. This interview is broadcast, and it causes a storm. There are requests for interviews from literally around the world, and Bob's life is never the same again. So is this true? Is this man telling us the truth? Well, there's no record at Caltech or MIT of Bob ever having studied there. There's no educational record of his degrees. There's no record of him ever working at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Nothing exists to back up or support Bob's claims of his education or work history. Now, George Knapp, being the investigative reporter that he is, says to Bob, well, okay, prove it to me. And Bob says, well, I'll take you there. So he takes him to Los Alamos, and George Knapp describes how he drives up to the security gate, and the security guard is, hi Bob, he seems to know him, and they're allowed in. Clearly security was more lax back then, and George is allegedly taken around the facility and introduced to various people, and Bob says, hey, this is where I worked, this was my office, and George Knapp clearly states that, yeah, people knew him, he clearly worked there. Further, George Knapp finds an entry in an internal phone directory, and in that Los Alamos internal phone directory is an entry for Robert Lazar. And that doesn't exist anymore. That's gone. Los Alamos have no record of Bob Lazar ever working there, and yet the directory, he's clearly entered into the internal phone directory. So, has there been a concerted effort to expunge all record of Bob's education, his place of work, to completely discredit him? Is that what's happened here? And has Bob been able to prove to George Knapp and others that he did work there? He was known there. He's an entry in the phone directory. And further to that, Bob also recalled the name of an agent or government official that performed background checks on him whilst waiting to work or gain access to his employment at Area 51. And this agent or government employee was a gentleman by the name of Thinkpen. And that's an unusual name. George Knapp was able to trace this Mr. Thinkpen, and he does recall performing background checks on Robert Lazar. So, which side do you come down on? Is this nothing but the fantasy of an unqualified wannabe physicist and ufology fantasist? Or is this an attempt to expunge the record and deny all knowledge of any such project and to completely discredit a former employee? I guess that's for you to decide. But over the years, Bob Lazar's story has never changed. He maintains exactly the same story. He describes the bone hand scanner that he used as a means to gain entrance into the facility, and it seems that technology, that method of security now does exist. It is a real thing. Bob provided his security badge, and Bob has never made any claims other than exactly what he said originally, that he was employed to reverse engineer propulsion technology on non-human craft, that it was powered by element 115, that he made very little progress, that he believed very little progress was being made, and yet the United States government or agents of the government are in possession of such non-human craft, and not just one, because Bob describes when he visited the hangar that all the hangar doors were open and that there were 9 hangars side by side, and that when he looked at the craft he was working on, he could see through all of the open hangar doors into the other 8 bays, and each one was occupied by a craft of some type, and indeed some of them showed what looked like kinetic damage, possibly where they'd been brought down. Is Bob telling the truth? And you know, you have to look into the eyes of this man. You really have to look into the eyes of this man, because he's not making outlandish claims that he's been taken aboard a craft and had mental downloads and he's been flown around the solar system or given guided tours around motherships. He simply says he was employed to do a job at a secret facility. He was shown technology that was non-human of origin, and that he handled and touched this technology, and that has remained his story for more than 35 years. Forgetting everything else. Forgetting all of the rest of this immense complex subject. Let's just distill it down to this. Let's just look at this for what it is. Never mind Roswell, never mind Aztec, never mind the Rendlesham Forest or Kecksburg or anything. Never mind the tall whites or the greys or the mantis. Put that aside for a moment, because this is a vast and difficult topic with many rabbit holes to go down, and no doubt there is disinformation being sowed into this arena to confuse and obfuscate. Let's just talk about Bob. If he's telling the truth, the world is not the same. The world, quite simply, is not the place we think it is, and we are being denied knowledge of the true UFO reality. It is that simple. It is distilled down into this very, very simple, straightforward claim by Robert Scott Lazar. Is he telling the truth? And if he is, the world is not the same. Or is he a charlatan, and a liar, and a chancer? That's for you to decide. I wish I knew. I wish I knew. I hope we all will know. Personally, I've been following the Robert Lazar story for more than 30 years. I've read about him. I've watched his videos, his podcasts that he's produced, the movies that he's been involved with. I've read his autobiography. I've thought about him. I've looked at him, and I've done the very best I can to actually stare into his eyes and just try and ascertain, is he telling the truth? And I think, as much as you can think, I think he is. That's my opinion. You may think differently. I think on balance of probability, he's telling the truth. I think insofar as you can be 100% certain, I'm 97% of the way there. I wish I could be 100%. I really do. But you just can't give it that last 2 or 3%, because until I see it, until I touch it, I can't know for certain. I can't know for certain 100%. But in so much as I believe, yes, I do. I think he's telling the truth. And I think, therefore, the world, quite simply, is a different place to that which we are told. I think Bob Lazar is telling the truth. I think people have been convicted and sent to prison on evidence, on eyewitness accounts, on evidence that is probably lesser than this. Because of the scale, because of the ask, it needs to be better than that, to be 100%. And as I say, I'm 97% of the way there. How about you? You know, I mean, it's very difficult. But I wanted to talk about Robert Lazar because he is the essence of this topic. He is the quintessential ufology, UFO whistleblower that all else seem to follow. His story is very straightforward. It hasn't changed for 35 years. It doesn't become more elaborate with time. He doesn't claim to know things or to have knowledge beyond that which he saw firsthand. That's it. Robert Lazar. Where do you stand on it? Quite possibly the greatest story. Well, I was going to say in ufology, but perhaps the greatest story of humankind. Anyway, it was good to speak with you. I enjoyed discussing this. It's been on my mind a lot and always has been for many, many years. So I hope you enjoyed this. And if you could, may I ask that you follow and subscribe and like. I'm trying to get this channel off the ground, and any support would be very much appreciated. So thank you very much again. I really appreciate it. And good night, good luck, and all stay well and healthy. Bye-bye.